Good evening and welcome to this series of lectures on rural urology. When you're planning this lecture, I did not expect many people to join because not many people would be interested to know or attend the full lecture on just Foley's catheter. People might think, what is there about Foley's catheter that you can talk for more than an hour? But there are a lot of times this simple Foley's catheter has caused a fair amount of problem to surgeons and doctors in general. From this slide, you'll see that the variety of information that you need to know about Foley's catheter. The common ones that we use for draining urine. And generally we use either 16 or 18 French catheters. And these are color coded. In countries and places where people are large, they probably use 20 French catheter, which is yellow. Many places, probably most of the world will use 18 French catheter. In places where people are short and small, we use 16 French catheter. And the color coding is standardized all over the world so that it's easy to identify. Then again, the tip, if you look at it, the variety of tips. The reason is that the urethra has a curve as it goes. It starts from the penile urethra and then there is a curve before it enters the bladder. To negotiate this curve, the Q-tip catheter is devised, and then if there is a stricture or there's a narrowing, to make it easier to pass, we have this narrow tip which will go first through the narrow strictured area and then it'll slide in easily. And the balloon also has varying sizes. Normally we use only about 8 ml or 10 ml of fluid to inflate the balloon. But then if you're putting a 3-way catheter after resecting the prostate, we generally tend to have a balloon which is almost the same size as the prostate that we resected. In other words, if you resect about 60 grams of prostate, we need to inflate the balloon to about 60 ml. See, one of the my first experience with the catheter was when I was doing general surgery in Vellore. Normally, after 6 months of general surgery posting, we have the specialty posting. So I was posted in urology. And there was a call from general surgery theatre saying that they are not able to pass the Foley's catheter. But then the rest of the department were busy with some other work. And they said, you go and see what the problem is. And I was sort of hesitating to go because you're the junior most person there. And you're after all a general surgery registrar, the junior person there. And they called from a parent unit or general surgery unit. But they said, okay, you just go, remember just 2 things. One, you use a lot of lubrication or jelly. And make sure that you hold the penis so that the curve is that you need to negotiate is only a single curve. So when I went there, just as I expected, the head of the department with the senior consultant were there, the senior registrars were there. None of them could, they were all waiting and they were shocked to see me. They were saying, what is this fellow going to do? We wanted the urologist to come. But then I said, can I try once and ask for a lot of jelly, apply a lot of jelly, and then made sure that there was only one curve. And I was able to successfully pass the catheter. So the dictum is that in urology, anything will go into anything else if well lubricated. So it's very important to use a lot of lubrication. And also if you look at the curve here, we don't want to have too many curves. So then to overcome that, what you need to do is to keep this straight, so that there is only one single curve to negotiate. So if the penis is here straight, then the curve is only a single curve which the catheter needs to negotiate. And if well lubricated, it'll comfortably go in. Another thing to remember is that if the patient is awake, there is a sphincter or voluntary contraction or the muscle which will prevent the catheter from going into the bladder. But then the good news is that because it's a voluntary muscle, patient can't hold it tight for a long time. So we need to constantly apply a gentle force. And once the patient relaxes the sphincter, then the catheter will comfortably go in. We always use antibiotic cover, especially in rural areas, because we are not very comfortable with the sterility of the hospitals or the equipment and the entire environment. In the West, people would not use antibiotic cover as far as possible. But then they have a very good follow-up. The sterile techniques are very good. And if there is any infection, they can immediately find out. But unfortunately, that's not the case in rural areas. So we would always prefer an antibiotic cover. So we generally give an antibiotic about half an hour to 1 hour before we do the sterilization, catheterization. And then we use adequate lubrication. And then, as I mentioned when we were starting, the dictum in urology is that anything will go into anything else if well lubricated. So use plenty of lubrication, which is very important because you need to use gentle force, and we don't want any injuries, because any injured urothelium, once there is injury, it's a problem because it's a tubular structure. And any healing, we need to remember that it takes place whenever there is a healing, it shrinks. When it shrinks, the tubular lumen becomes smaller, narrow. And with the narrowing, there's always a problem. So antibiotic cover is very important. Adequate lubrication is the next one. And again, just as we mentioned a little earlier, the curve again is very important. So we need to hold the penis up so that we have one gentle curve to negotiate. If there are multiple curves to negotiate, there are more chances of injuries. So you don't want any injuries. So only one curve. So it is better to have the penis up, pointing up like this, so that there is one curve to negotiate. And when the patient is awake, we have to remember that there is a sphincter at the level of the bulbar urethra, where the prostate and the urethra meet. So people will contract the sphincter. They don't like being catheterized. Nobody likes that. Even if they have an problem, even if they are in retention, they don't like being catheterized. So what happens is that they will keep contracting. So then, but if you try and force the catheter in, then it will cause injury, false passages, and later on stricture in that area. You don't want that happening. So when there is any resistance, you hold that area and keep constant gentle pressure. But the sphincter is a voluntary contraction. So patients can't hold on contracting for a long time. So there'll come a time when they will relax a bit, and that is the time the catheter will go in. So you need to wait sufficiently so that the patient relaxes and the catheter goes in. So the important is antibiotic cover, gentleness, and sufficient lubrication. So what is self-calibration? So catheterization is when somebody else is passing a catheter. Self-calibration is when the patient passes a catheter themselves. When do we do it? We do it on several occasions. One of the first papers which I wrote, which is quoted quite a bit, is about comparing regular outpatient urethral dilatation versus self-calibration for urethral strictures. So if there is a stricture, what we do is we do endoscopic internal urethrotomy or visual cutting of the stricture. So normally the passage is about 1 centimeter or 30 French. It becomes a tiny opening. So then with the scope, you open it and get it back to the 30 French size. So that is what you do in surgery. But then what happens when it heals? It'll form a stricture again. It'll become narrow. And when we cut, we don't cut only the scar tissue. In fact, very often we cut a little more and they cut into normal tissue. And the normal tissue again will become a scar. So if you don't do anything, then after you do a EIU, it becomes even worse stricture. So the only way of preventing this is you should not allow it to heal. So how do you do it? The easiest method is to do self-calibration. So self-calibration, you ask the patients to do. So normally what they do is they pass the Foley's catheter gently, and obviously the catheter size should be smaller than the size of the urethra. And again, the same principles. They should apply sufficient lubrication or jelly. But then they don't need antibiotic every time. Because if you look at it, in one way it is similar to a mouth. It is not within the body or enclosed space. And that is the reason why we get away with a lot of little bit of infection or bacteria or whatever it is with the urology. So I used to tell the people when they say, do you have to do self-calibration a long time? I ask them, do you brush your teeth every day? Almost everybody does brush their teeth. And the epithelium inside the mouth is similar to the epithelium or urothelium of the urethra and the bladder. So you get used to it once you start doing self-calibration. So you may remember your children. They find it very difficult to brush your teeth when you start teaching them how to brush your teeth. But once they learn it, once they're comfortable with it, nobody bothers about brushing your teeth, or they don't cry over it. So similarly, once you learn self-calibration, initially there is a resistance, there is a problem, people don't like it. But once they start doing it, they don't mind it. And the body also gets used to it. So what is necessary? The catheter has to be clean and dry. If it is wet, the bacterial concentration is high. And if it is dry, the bacterial concentration is less, and it doesn't get transferred very quickly to the bladder. And these bacteria multiply every 20 minutes. The doubling time is 20 minutes. So if there are 10 bacteria, 20 minutes later there will be 20, and another 20 minutes will be 40, and so on. So you need to have a clean and dry catheter. And after some time, the patient themselves will work out how much of jelly or lubrication they need to pass the catheter. And the ideal time is usually they need privacy, they need to be clean. So we tell them to do it just after they have a bath. And once a day is sufficient for these self-catheterizations. And men, it's fairly easier, even though the tubes are longer. To do the procedure, once they learn it, it's easier. But then in women, it is a little difficult. And that is why if you see in the diagram, sometimes it's easier for them to stand and do it. They need to separate the labia and locate the orifice and keep doing self-calibration. So this is not only for strictures. In sometimes when the lesson about systemetrogram, we found various disorders which are due to neurovesical dysfunction or damage to the nerves which supply the bladder. And here also, we might have to do self-calibration. Sometimes if the muscles or nerves don't act at all, you might have to empty every 4 hours. Sometimes you have to do it, you pass urine and then empty the remaining amount of urine and so on. So there are various ways of doing self-calibration, but this is the method to do it. So there are a few things which you need to note about the continuous bladder drainage. Of course, I don't have to tell you why you do a continuous bladder drainage. But whenever we put a continuous bladder drainage, some people have the habit of blocking the catheter. That is not a good idea at all, because any catheter will have infection and it is a foreign body. So there will be foreign body reaction and infection. And we don't want a lot of urine in the bladder. So it has to be on a continuous drainage. And again, you need to remember that you need not have you should have the bag, should not have the bag above the level of the bladder. It should be below for it to drain comfortably. And then while fixing, it is generally good to fix both the catheter and the urosac separately, and again with the mesentery. I don't know whether you understand what I'm talking about as a mesentery. See, if this is the catheter, you put an adhesive like this and stick this portion in the body, so that there is a little bit of adhesive here which allows movement of the catheter, so that it doesn't come out or it doesn't pull or it doesn't cause any pressure damage. That is the reason why you always need to stick the adhesive with the mesentery. And again, in men, it's preferable to put the catheter over the abdomen so that that curve is maintained, so that there are not unduly high pressure at any of those curves in the bladder. And one more thing you need to remember about continuous bladder drainage is that if there is a lot of air in the column, in the drainage tube, that can also act as a block, bubbles or air. So you need to try and relieve these air blocks and make sure that it is not there. Ordinarily, it may not be very significant, but if you're having bladder irrigation, especially after surgery like TURP and so on, it is important that there is no air lock and the bladder keeps draining continuously. And a few abnormal situations. See, when there is catheter in the bladder, you want adequate hydration, because there are bound to be much more number of bacteria in the system compared to a normal bladder. And one way of clearing these bacteria is flushing them out. So if the more you drink water, the more you flush these bacteria away. And again, it will prevent airlock, and there are a lot of advantages of adequate hydration. And there are some bacteria which, especially if it is Proteus, they precipitate in alkaline urine. And some of precipitation comes in acid urine. So depending on what type of urine it is, you need to either alkalinize or acidify the urine to make sure that urine stays clear and doesn't block any of these tubes. And easy way of unblocking is to twist the tubes. You twist the tube and release, so that causes some suction or negative pressure. After a little bit of positive pressure, so that these small blocks can be relieved. But if nothing like that happens, if it is the easy way to apply sufficient pressure is to take a 2 ml syringe, disconnect after cleaning and draping, flush with the 2 ml syringe, which nicely fits into the Foley's catheter. And if the catheter needs to be there for a long time, then the silicone catheters should be used, because these catheters are less likely to cause encrustations and block and so on. Okay, so then what are the problems that you can have? Sometimes in the operating room, say you've done a EAU or a endoscopic ureterotomy, or you managed to do a urethral dilatation and get into the bladder, then it may be difficult once blood and clots form in the urethra to pass the catheter. In those cases, if you have a scope, it is good to pass a scope and a guide wire in the bladder. And then when you remove the scope, you need to remember the principle that we taught you earlier. Keep pushing, pulling, so that the tip stays in the same place. So once you have a guide wire in, it is easy to thread the catheter over a guide wire and pass it into the bladder. So there, what you do is you take there is always a hole somewhere here near the tip. So you take a 15 number blade, hold it upwards and make a cut, and then you can pass the guide wire over it and you can push the guide wire. Here also you need to hold the guide wire close to your body, keep it taut, and little by little you push the guide wire into the bladder. And sometimes even if with the experienced urologist, you'll be able to just about, if there are multiple passages and a very bad stricture, you'll just about manage to get into the bladder. Then we have only the half round sheath which covers the EAU sheath. So then what we do is we pass a Foley's catheter using the half round sheath, and it's only the 14 French which will go comfortably over the half round sheath. And sometimes if there is a mild stricture, or if there is a little bit of block in the strictured area, the regular soft Foley's catheter might not go in. So then what you have to do is you can make it a little more stiff. So you might have noticed that catheters, silicone catheters or K90 catheters will go in, while the Foley's catheter may not go in. So in that case, then you can make it stiff by passing a guide wire inside the Foley's catheter, which will add a little bit of stiffness to the Foley's catheter. And then sometimes you need to fill the bladder before you try and use a little force to get into the bladder. Okay, this is another problem which we frequently come across. You had patients had a catheter for a long time, and when you want to remove it, you try and deflate the balloon. It doesn't deflate. What do you do then? There are several things which you can try. So very often it is the mechanism near the tip of the or near the end of the Foley's. So if you just cut it, that might suffice for the balloon to deflate. If that does not happen, then what you can do is you can cut the catheter as shown in the figure here. So here the catheter is cut, and then you can pass a small needle into the channel which goes to the balloon, and this might be enough sometimes to deflate. And if that doesn't work, the next thing you can try is try and pass a guide wire. But this time, normally whenever we pass a guide wire, we tell you to make sure that it's a flimsy end which goes inside first. But here, since you want to break the balloon, you need to pass a stiff end inside. So that you can thread it along here so that it goes right up to the balloon and then breaks it. Or if there is any long needle which is available, if the guide wire doesn't go, the long spinal needle or any of those needles can be used to puncture. Okay, so then if none of these work, sometimes I mean, the various methods that we discussed earlier might not work and may not be successful. And it is important that then what you do is, then you fill the bladder so that you can try various chemicals to rupture the balloon. So here the need for filling the bladder is that when these chemicals, we don't want them causing irritation and inflammation in the bladder. And again, these balloons may be full of bacteria. And as we said, the longer it stays, the more number of bacteria we'll have. So what can be injected? If I can inject ether, chloroform. These two are ether is quite a successful thing. Many balloons we have broken. But then it causes a lot of pain and discomfort. So you always make sure that the bladder is sufficiently full before you inject ether. But nowadays, even for anesthesia, ether is not available in most of the areas because anesthetists shifted to various other forms of anesthesia. And the other way, liquid paraffin, we have used many times, but they're not as successful as ether or chloroform. Acetone and mineral oils, these have been tried, but they're not probably the only thing which is I have found working quite well is ether. And then the next thing, if none of them work, in women it's easier because you can just pull the catheter and then you can pass a spinal needle or any sharp instrument along the urethra and puncture it. Or if you have an ultrasound and if you're able to locate the thing, then you can puncture using a needle and ultrasound. But these again are not simple procedures because ultrasound and other places, we have only two-dimensional images. So converting a three-dimensional to two-dimension and then again inferring out of it is a little difficult and needs a little experience. So when we have the means, the most successful which is the last resort, which is always successful, what we use is we use a ureteroinoscope. So we hold the catheter taut, as you can see here. This is the catheter you see. And then we pass a ureteroinoscope along with it till we are able to see the balloon. So once we see the balloon, then we pass a Bugbee electrode and then we sort of give a cutting current so that it bursts the balloon. So this is probably the most effective, but then unfortunately you need the equipment which is quite expensive for doing this. So to recap, in women it's easier because you hold it, you can feel it, and you can puncture with a needle or any instrument which you pass in the urethra. But in men, if you have an ultrasound guidance or if you're able to palpate it, you can still use spinal needles from above because these are thin and they can, if you're able to go to the right location, you can do it. But before that, you should try and cut the catheter, then try and pass chemicals or guide wire to try and break this. So in short, so what we need to learn about catheters is that you need to choose the right type of catheter, including the correct size, depending on the age and size of the patient, and the duration that you want to keep the catheter. And when you're passing the catheter, you should give sufficient antibiotics and remember the curves and remember the fact that you need to use sufficient jelly. And then when you have a catheter, it's always good to, except for a very short while when they're traveling for a short while or something like that, to have a continuous bladder drainage. And if you need to clamp or change, it's better to do the Urosac rather than the catheter, because you don't want to cause any damage to the catheter by doing this. And if you need to fix just one thing, fix the urosac and not the catheter, so that there are no traction and pulling on the catheter. So, and you have to remember that any damage, even a little bit of force, can damage the urothelium and cause permanent strictures. So you might think that these catheters are simple. So we'll show you one of the videos where we found that there's a huge stone which formed over a piece of catheter which was left behind. So in fact, we didn't even suspect there was a piece of catheter in the bladder when we were dealing with the stone. So when you're reaching towards the end of the procedure, we're wondering what is this structure which looks sort of yellow and it's difficult to break. We remember that the technique of breaking the stones is that we break with a lithoclast by repeatedly banging. And only when the tissue is brittle, it breaks. If it's soft and elastic, it doesn't break, like normal human tissue. You can start, Kesam.
See what you need to bend down and then go into the bladder. And here you see the stone sitting there.
When you're using a lithoclast, you need to fix the stone against some place and then repeatedly keep banging it or using the system. Actually, even now we can see a little bit of the Foley's catheter. At that time, we didn't think it was it. By now we realize it is actually a piece of catheter which was there. See, the brittle stones, it's easy to sort of break and remove it. But a soft catheter like this, it's quite a challenge to take it out.
Try to clockwise or anti-clockwise.
So when you're stuck, one other thing, another thing you need to learn is, so when you're pulling somewhere and if it is stuck, one way of dealing is to keep rotating and slowly applying pressure. These rotary movements help it to sort of slip and come out. Here it's a little big and we are having difficulty in pulling it. So what we do is we rotate. And this rotary movements generally help to achieve the result what you want. But if you hold and damage the urothelium, it will cause a stricture. Luckily, this patient did not have any stricture later. Okay, can you go back to the slides, Kesa? Okay, now we're going to talk a little, because I thought it's a very short lecture. We'll discuss a little bit about what you're planning for the future. Because right now in India, if you look at it, the number of COVID patients are on the rise. We've not reached the plateau yet. And we're not sure how long we're going to have this lockdown. And the longer it takes for the lockdown to be lifted, there are more and more of patients who are waiting in rural areas who need urology treatment. So, so what we are thinking of with the International Federation of Rural Surgeons and the Association of Rural Surgeons of India is to start a course which will be recognized by the university. And also we can equip the surgeons or doctors working in rural areas with knowledge and equipment. So generally, if you need a urology setup, you need the cystoscope, you need the telescope, you need the camera, you need the light source, and all those things can add up to quite a bit. So it can cost anywhere, if you buy a cheap Chinese material, is about 600,000 rupees or maybe $60,000, or it can keep going up twice or thrice that. And it is not worthwhile investment for a small surgeon working in a rural area or any doctor practicing in rural areas. So what we have done is, cases right now working on the third generation, we have replaced the telescope with a camera so that we can see the pictures directly in the laptop screen. So why do you need to learn urology for patients working in rural or remote areas? We have done surveys in a lot of places. And if I have time, maybe later on you can see a map of India. And the places where we did survey are in not the regular stone belt of India. These are places where the incidence of stone is supposed to be less. Mountains and cold areas. Even those areas, even in remote outpatient departments, 5% of all the patients who come for the OPD have urology problems. And almost 90% are related to urinary tract stones. But interestingly, half of them can be managed with these simple low-cost investment in methods. So in other words, about 3% of the patients whom you see in any OPD, you'll be able to manage if you're able to know a little bit of how to manage, and with very low cost investment. Who can learn? Almost anybody who is have an internet connection and who are working in rural areas, who are interested to help the patients in rural areas, can easily learn these. I'm sure some of you have been attending the rural urology lectures. We talked about low-cost urodynamic studies, cystometogram, and then how to do a diagnostic cystoscopy, and also how to do DJ stenting. And what would be the investment? As I said, the investment is only this low-cost laptop cystoscope, for which you don't need anything. In fact, once we took the scope to an area in Arunachal Pradesh near the China border, where he had to walk for almost 10 hours uphill from the nearest place where he had electricity. So there's no electricity, not even a generator, because we had to carry the diesel or petrol for the generator if we had to use it. But even there, we were able to do these procedures because the power and the image, everything is from the laptop. But unfortunately, those places we can't give guidance because we need internet also there. Okay, what are the procedures you'll be able to learn in this course? Obviously, the first thing is urodynamic procedures. The bladder pressure studies, which we talked in the first class, will help you to decide what exactly is the problem. So whether it'll benefit by medical treatment, say if you know the maximum voiding pressure, you can find out whether you need surgical treatment or whether medical treatment is enough. Or the problem is actually due to neurological dysfunction and not obstruction. So we'll be able to clearly tell what is the cause for the lower urinary tract symptoms. And then if you combine it with the diagnostic cystoscopy, then you can diagnose a variety of conditions, starting from urethral strictures, urethral inflammation, benign prostatic hyperplasia, prostatic malignancy, bladder tumors, bladder stones, diverticulum, whatever you name it, most of the diagnosis can be done. And then only procedure probably you need to learn is to do a DJ stenting, because this will help you treat stones which are up to 1.2 centimeters or 1.5 centimeters sometimes. So just this fact that you are able to do a double J stenting will dilate the ureter about 2.5 to 3 times the normal size, and will make most of the stones come out. And if you need, if you're a little adventurous, if you need a little more, you can use a bug bee for a lot of things. You can treat small bladder tumors with a bug bee. Even prostate obstruction, the blocked area can be reduced via bug bee. So with just this low-cost scope and a bug bee and some simple instruments, you can treat most of the patients that are there with these low-cost methods. So how are we going to do the training? So what we are planning is, now we're taking the lectures right now. I think more than 20-25 people are there, and a lot of people may be watching the live streaming which happens. So we cannot have much of an interaction. But if we have a smaller groups, 3 or 4 or 5 people, then it is possible to have interactive lectures, so that you can ask questions, you can clarify your doubts, and also you can we can make sure that each of you have understood what we're talking about. And then we can use what we call, we have been using now because of the lockdown, Zoom consultations. So KSO fixes up the meeting schedules, and they send the various reports earlier. Then we can talk face to face with the patient. And also the provider, the healthcare provider, the local doctor there or a nurse who's taking care. So we can discuss the treatment modalities, and also the patients will have a confidence that they're talking to a urologist or a specialist elsewhere. So we can do this Zoom consultations. And also, Kesa will show a video where Zoom supervision of these minor procedures is also possible. So in the rural areas, we have had rural doctors, especially in Northeast, who have been able to do DJ stenting under supervision. And if you're doing a scope piece, we can have a look at the screen and tell you what are the possibilities and what to do next. So the whole thing can be done in a remote way. Next. Or you want to show the video now? The Zoom stenting case?
Yes, sir. I think we'll do that.
And is Dr. Boto there?
Yes, sir. He's also online.
Okay, so he can sort of describe how he's able to do DJ stenting with the laptop cystoscope and show the scope. Okay, now we can see that. Yeah.
Only one stone on the left cervical junction region.
Yeah.
You have given final anesthesia. We are going to position the patient now.
So you separate the labia, and again you need to be careful about the various curves and gently insert the scope. Okay. He's in the urethra now, and okay, that's the bladder neck. Then you go. See here. So there you see the interureteric ridge. Then you go to either side. I think he is going to the left side first because that's where the stone is. There you can see it. Just wait there till the peristalsis comes. Yeah. Little bit to the right. If there is difficulty, another option to consider is to use of a hydrophilic guide wire. But if the bladder is full, you can open the other side and let out some water. See somewhere there, that white thing you see there, somewhere near it would be there. Good. So once you find the orifice, you need to align the scope so that if the orifice is there, the scope has to be in line with that. And then slowly, centimeter by centimeter, you need to put the guide wire. And stop pushing the moment there is some resistance. Then it's very important to slowly take out the pusher. So you need to push 1 centimeter and pull it out. Push, pull like that. So while Dr. Biju is pushing the guide wire, the nurse is pulling it out. So the next step is to put the DJ stent. Again, need to make sure that the guide wire is taut. DJ stent has a double coiling J-shaped structure which keeps a memory so that it doesn't slip out once you place it in. But then we use a guide wire to straighten it and then pass it, and then once you pull the guide wire out, the coiling will take place again. So now the stent is almost reaching near the orifice. So here there is a slight curve, so you might have to use a little bit of force and push it in. And at that time, it's better to have the scope as close to the ureteric orifice as possible. So once it goes there, then the next thing you need to do is use the pusher to push the stent. Hold the guide wire close to the body so that you don't move. If you keep it here, the chances of moving is higher. But if you keep it close to your body, it doesn't move much. As far as possible, all these curves should be as straight as possible. And keep gently pushing centimeter by centimeter. So sometimes if there is any difficulty, you can pull out the guide wire a little bit by about 1 centimeter and then push. So now it's enough almost. You can see the stent and the pusher. So then you need to pull out the guide wire. And again, you should not use much of a force, gently. All the movements has to be very gentle. Okay, so now you can see the stent coiling in the bladder. The way it is going to look as though it has probably gone right inside past the stone into the renal pelvis on the left side. Now you can stop and go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, what we have noticed is that it is possible to guide from a remote area. So what we do is we have the connection in both laptop and cell phone. So then with the cell phone, you change it to share and go to the camera. So you can actually point at the correct places where we need with the cell phone. And the picture quality is good enough so that we can actually advise on how to go about it. Say, sometimes it is, if there's inflammation, infection, it's difficult to find out the orifice. So we can guide you. And with people with experience can spot the orifice much quicker or earlier, and they know how to move about and all that. So all those things we can do from a remote areas. So you can learn through the didactic lectures, the Zoom consultation, and supervision of the procedures. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mean, very often people would be happy to have a certification or backing for all these things which they learn. So we have two organizations, the Association of Rural Surgeons of India and the International Federation of Rural Surgeons. Both these organizations are backing this course. And it will be conducted by the Rural Surgery Research and Training Center, which is located in one remote area in Jharkhand in India. called Biru, even though it is located in a very remote area. If you look at the picture, it's quite a well-established hospital where it is possible to do a lot of research work and teaching and training and so on. And the reason we are doing it is that most of the time the research in surgery is guided by the various corporates and people who want to make money. So we are trying to focus research for rural areas to make things less expensive and far more easy for the rural doctors. So that is the reason why we're working on establishing this rural surgery training and research center. And this will be accredited to the Martin Luther University in Shillong, which will give the certification. So you'll get a certificate, you'll have the backing of associations, and also you'll have a constant guidance. So whoever is interested in these courses can give a name to Keso and he'll give you the instruction of what to do. And now can Dr. Boto, can you take over and do the talking?
Yeah. So before we hand over to Dr. Boto, just show the images of the outside images of the cystoscope.
Okay, you have it. And Dr. Boto doesn't have it.
Yeah, we are here together actually.
Okay, so he can show it.
Okay, so you can see my screen, I hope.
Yeah, you can see it.
So this is what it looks like. Basically, it's connected to the laptop via the USB interface, USB 2, and this is into the scope, and that's the scope we have. And over here we have the sheet here. So I think this is what it comprises of. I will now hand over to Dr. Boto.
No, but Keso, can you just connect it and keep it on a forearm or something like that and show the images in the screen?
Yes, sir. Just give us a moment. We'll connect that. I'll hand it over to Dr. Boto.
Okay, meanwhile, Dr. Boto can do the talking. Dr. Boto, how many have you done using the laptop cystoscope?
I have done about 45 cases of, including diagnostic cystoscopy and stenting. Yeah.
Okay, how do you find it? Is it easy, difficult, or what has been your experience?
It has been quite useful. So I just had one short picture of one stenting and one diagnostic cystoscopy done where we found a small tumor in the bladder. I think.
Okay, you're going to show it now?
What do you say?
Yeah, so that first we'll show the images.
Yes, okay. Yeah.
Okay,
this is whose, your hand or Boto's hand?
Yeah, it's my hand, sir.
Okay, good. It looks rather pale. Are you eating well?
I think the quality of the picture, it'll be better to see the some cases which I had done.
Okay. Anyway, just show maybe with this one's camera, with your camera, can you show how he's showing?
Yeah.
You can show the tip of the scope, the connections, and the screen with your cell phone camera, Keso.
I'll do that, sir. That will disconnect the feed from the cystoscope again.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
Because you share from now you see the feed from the scope.
So you can just show it. Yeah. So this is the scope. This is what.
That's what he is showing.
And it comes all the way here like this. So here, in this model, there is a USB connection here. We are trying to get rid of this so that there
will go directly to the thing.
less problems in future.
Then show the screen.
So yeah.
Okay, how do you get it in the screen? Is it difficult or simple, or do you need special software, or is it all available everywhere?
It comes with a very small software. The software size is about couple of MB. I think it's less than 5 MB.
Okay.
downloadable, and it's very easy to use. You just connect the cystoscope to the laptop, you open the software, and it's ready to use. There are no additional add-ons or installations, no heavy files involved here.
Okay.
It's not only low budget, but it's also low on your system resources. You don't need to have a high-end dedicated laptop or a system. Any laptop, any system with a USB connection will be able to utilize this device.
So you don't need advanced laptop. Any simple, whatever laptop that people have is sufficient.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And again, it's good to record also. Is it recording possible or?
Yeah. So we'll now play a couple of clips which Dr. Boto has brought for us.
Okay. So basically, it's a very low cost unit. But then there are a little bit of differences. You need to remember that this scope is a 0-degree scope and not a 30-degree. So this is from Boto's. Here you can appreciate the image quality is pretty good. Almost like that of a regular camera. Dr. Boto, how did you record this? From where? You need to unmute and talk, case.
Just from my laptop. The simple software which is there in the laptop, it has a recording facility also.
Okay, so this is what you are actually seeing.
Yes, this is what I'm saying.
Okay. So here actually you can appreciate quite well. You can see the Vero, the opening of the Vero, and then into the bladder neck, and the stent. Okay. So probably people who have seen cystoscopy will appreciate the quality of the video and the feed. Everything is pretty good.
So this is the second video of another procedure.
Okay. And this probably would have been a difficult stenting.
Yes, sir.
Because if there is a block, if there is a stone, there is a lot of infection. The infection leads to a fair amount of inflammation. So when there is inflammation, then you need to do it slowly. You need to wait for the ureteric orifice to open and use the guider quite gently.
So this is the one which the biopsy showed that it was a
low-grade tumor.
Carcinoma. Yeah, these are the only two videos I have
Good.
brought here today. Yeah.
So I think we have only 5 more minutes. If anyone has any questions here, welcome to ask. Otherwise, in summarizing, this is a very low investment, low cost method. And also it's possible to do everything under supervision, and also possible to learn comfortably with the one-to-one talk. And it's endorsed by the Association of Rural Surgeons of India and International Federation of Rural Surgeons. And KSO is working on a low-cost model, because these two, what the pictures you show in the prototype, which is probably not as good as the final product which you're trying to develop. Because when you're trying out things, we don't buy the most expensive camera or most expensive things. So it will not cost much. But then we like to know how many people are interested, because that will help us decide on the costing, because we need to pay the accreditation fees to the Martin Luther University if we need a certification from them. And then we also need to have certain creditors and pay for each student for examination and third-party evaluation and credentialing and so on. So it'll be good if you're interested in the low-cost laptop cystoscope and the course. Please let Keso know. And you can also talk to your friends and see how many of them are interested. And the more number are interested, the less expensive it be, because the whatever accreditation fees that we pay to the university is a fixed amount. So that will be shared by many people. Again, the thing about if you buy in bulk, we can bargain about the material that we buy from the vendors.